Joining me today is Laurie Cure, PhD. We're going to be talking about psychological safety in the workplace. Studies consistently show that when employees feel safe to voice concerns, share ideas, and acknowledge mistakes without fear of judgment, they become more innovative, more productive, and more committed to their organization. In comes Laurie Cure, PhD, who has spent more than 3 decades helping leaders and teams cultivate healthier workplace cultures. She shares practical strategies for building psychological safety, strengthening collaboration, and creating an environment where people can truly thrive beyond financial rewards. She is a leading voice in executive coaching and serves as the CEO of Innovative Connections. Her expertise has been showcased in publications including Fast Company, Business Insider, and BuiltIn. Welcome to the show, Laurie. Nice to have you here today.
Thanks, Kathryn. It's nice to be here.
Okay, so what are we talking about? Psychological safety in the workplace. And I know you've written a book about leading without fear. What does that mean? How does that fit? What psychological safety in the workplace?
Yeah, psychological safety essentially is the ability for employees to feel safe speaking up without fear of embarrassment or ridicule or punishment of some sort. I oftentimes talk with leaders and we look at their environments and whether their employees feel psychologically safe. And they often say, well, no one's getting fired for speaking up, or no one's getting put on performance plans for speaking up. And what they don't realize is that there's this underlying variable around embarrassment or being shut out, ridiculed, all sorts of other ways that we unconsciously prevent people from feeling psychologically safe to talk in the workplace.
All right. So let's talk about this.
Yeah.
What can we look for? Well, like say you're sitting down at a meeting and you're having, middle management or whomever is having a meeting in the workplace with employees. What are some of the signs and symptoms that you know that they don't feel safe, that they
Mm,
are, yeah.
yeah, that's a great question. I think the first one is just silence. When you struggle to get people to speak up, to share, to challenge you, if people are always in agreement with what you say as the leader, there's oftentimes an undercurrent of fear or lack of psychological safety. I think the other things you start to see are, um, maybe some bullying behaviors. You see triangulation of communication. So people might leave the meeting and talk to each other at, kind of that meeting after the meeting concept. There might be gossip that occurs. In the meeting, you might see some nonverbal signs. So you might see people kind of looking at each other, kind of doing the little side eye, or yeah, just kind of those nonverbal behaviors that you might just pay attention to, that we oftentimes, when we're in meetings and going so fast, we just overlook.
Yeah, I find that, I've been at many meetings where I think one of the second or third thing you said, whatever, but people kind of
Yeah.
look at each other, whisper, then they
Yeah.
go outside and they're whispering to each other. And obviously people are unhappy and they don't feel comfortable. Okay, so let's take it step by step. What do you do to create those kinds of meetings, the healthier, so that it really very specific? What are the practical steps to make people trust that what they say or that they can be open and there's a certain there's accountability, of course, but that they can feel that they can trust the
Yeah.
leaders. Yeah.
Well, and I think your comment about trust is a really pivotal one, because psychological safety and trust really go hand in hand. Two sides of the same coin. They're partners with each other. So without trust, psychological safety doesn't exist. And trust is really built on the foundation of integrity. So following up and doing what you say you're going to do. Can I believe what you say is true? It also has a huge element of, do I believe you have my back? So am I free to make mistakes and not have punishment? Can I feel supported by you in ways that build trust? And so those trust pieces become really critical for psychological safety. I often, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give leaders is, be very impeccable with your words. What we say and how we say it is one of the most critical ways that we either build psychological safety or drive fear. And that can be subtle things. So it can be the tone that we use. Can be just minor things that we say, like, "Oh, that's great, but that's not that great of an idea. Let's move on to the next." So being very cautious with those things really is the pivotal place for building psychological safety. Another kind of practical tip is get curious. Leaders oftentimes think that they have to have the answers, they have to come in with the expertise and the knowing. Pause a little bit, get curious, ask some questions, pose some things back to the group. Even if you have all the answers, allow other people a voice in the room.
Yeah, I
And I
think
think,
that's, yeah, go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah,
No,
no, please.
allow
Uh,
other,
yeah, go ahead.
both. I'm not allowing you another place in the room. Go ahead, continue. Yeah, that's good
Well,
advice, obviously.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I think the third thing, and then I'd love for you to hear your thoughts. The
yeah.
third thing is really admitting your mistakes. So, how do we allow mistakes to become learning opportunities? Now, there's a point where mistakes have to have consequences, but the more we can create learning environments, the more we build psychological safety. So,
So
let
if
me
you're
pause
the
there.
boss, I'm going to stop you on that one. So let's say you're the leader, and you can relate perhaps to what this person is saying, and then you talk about your own mistakes and that admit that you've made mistakes, not and so that makes people feel more comfortable that perhaps they can admit some of the mistakes that they've made and what they've learned from it. I guess isn't that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one huge place. So that's where the vulnerability comes in. So how do we disclose a little bit about our own learnings from the mistakes we've made? The other piece of that is when someone else makes a mistake, what is your response as a leader? So is your natural response to blame and punish, or is your natural response to get curious and say, what's gone on here? What's happened? How do we learn from this, as opposed to kind of punish from it? There's some research around systems theory, and it says that 80% of the time when something doesn't work as intended, it's the result of the system, not the person. And that statistic varies. I've seen it all as high as 90 to 95%. But our natural inclination is to blame someone, to think that it's someone's fault. And the minute we can remove fault and start to look at what actually was involved in this issue or this problem or this mistake happening, the more we can have others feel like, okay, it's not about me. It's actually like, let's figure out what happened. And I might have been a contributing factor, but oftentimes I'm not. So how do we get curious there?
Yeah, I think people get the leader and the person who is in the meeting, you get defensive. Is that's kind
Yes,
of like this spontaneous, there's this, I don't know whether it's just a natural reaction, but you really have to maybe just not respond right away too. And I'm talking seconds, just, calm down. Okay, how am I going to respond rather than getting defensive and then getting into a debate? And as you're saying, that's really not helpful in terms of collaboration or anything else.
absolutely.
How do you connect this to financial um financial incentives, or you're saying that if you follow this playbook, you actually will encourage employees they will do better work, they'll feel more comfortable, and is that connected to financial prosperity within the company?
Absolutely. What I hear you saying is a lot around the creativity piece and innovation. The minute we diminish psychological safety through fear, we diminish the creativity that people can bring forward, the ideas that they bring forward, the problems that they surface, and all of that stifles innovation, which ultimately then has significant financial implications. The other piece around this is, turnover and retention. So when people are in environments where there's not safety, their turnover rates become higher. I'm going to look for another job, and research will also show that you lose your high performers first. So you've got all these costs with knowledge management leaving the organization, and recruitment costs, and all of the pieces that go with just retention.
So what do you do about the leader who's not doing it correctly? How do you judge them? I mean, how do you weed out the the leaders who are not following this kind of a script that we're talking about, and they are, not encouraging creativity and responsibility and all of those kinds of things. How does that work?
Yeah, so a lot of times I think it's up to their leader to be responsible for seeing some of these things. The work that we do is really pivotal in that strategy. We do coaching interventions, so we oftentimes will get called into organizations where the CEO or someone on the executive team knows that this person isn't that there's something going on there, but they can't quite put their finger on it because these behaviors are difficult sometimes to notice. So we come in, we do coaching, we also do observation coaching where we'll watch a leader conduct their daily business, have their meetings, conduct business, and then we get to come in and give advice. Like, here's the place where you use some language that actually was fear driven. So, for example, the word why. You talked about defensiveness earlier. Anytime we use the word why, it it risks defensiveness because, if I say, well, why did you do that? my natural inclination is to defend and to share why I did that, and and it creates this wall. So we help leaders to understand that here's some things that you're doing really unconsciously, maybe, that are driving some of the behaviors that are undesirable for you.
Okay, can you give us some, let's maybe take just a couple of very specific examples. You're asked to be
Yeah.
called into a company to observe or whatever, and you observe what you've been talking about. Put that in a context of a real problem, like within a meeting, for instance. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
what's the issue? What are the issues?
I think it can be anything. It can be a problem solving meeting. So we've got a process breakdown, and we want to take a look at it. Most of the time when we get called in, it's because there's just this subtle, like, a leader's not performing the way they need them to, but the organization is really vested in their success. So we'll get called in to say, what is actually going on here? What's happening with the team? So we might do interviews, or, like I said, we might do observation coaching. So it's not necessarily around a specific issue, um, like a process breakdown, for example. It's oftentimes more about just a general leadership deficiency that is being witnessed, but you just can't quite put your finger on it.
What happens now? Things have changed considerably, obviously, in the past 4 to 5 years post pandemic. And people are going to work differently. Say, sometimes half the time they work in an office, half the time they work at home. How does this impact what you're talking about?
Yeah. So one it's very complicated, and so I'm
Yeah,
trying to
okay.
think, okay, what's my personal view on this versus not. So you're right, a lot of companies are operating in either hybrid environments or more remote environments, or they're doing the opposite and they're pulling people back in. All of those decisions have an impact on psychological safety. So there's some new information starting to come out with organizations who are pulling people back um, against the employee's desires. That creates a level of distrust, oftentimes because employees are feeling like, I'm not trusted, so I'm being asked to come back in so that I can be monitored more, so that I can be so I can prove, that I'm actually working. So I think that's an element of psychological safety there. The other piece that brings up for me is this notion of inclusion. So if we think about more remote environments, one of the challenges we have on that side of the fence is making sure that everyone feels a sense of inclusion in the group. Because if we don't feel a sense of belonging, then our psychological safety is diminished. So how do we, as leaders, make sure that we're bringing our groups together to be collaborative when they're either hybrid or remote? And one of the things I talk about is what I call micro inclusions. So all of these little things that we can do on a daily basis that just help draw people in, using people's names, taking someone to lunch, writing a thank you card, just these tiny little things, these micro inclusions that help people feel connected to the leader and to their team members.
What about, and you've been doing this for the past 30 years, so obviously you've had a lot of experience. Well, how has this all evolved? I mean, there's an evolution, I guess, in terms of, workplace health, psychological safety. And where do you see us going from here?
Yeah, it has evolved pretty significantly. Emotional intelligence is kind of an underpinning of this as well, and that really came about in the early 1990s. So while that seemed like not long ago, it probably is at this point. But yeah, so I think the more we can build that emotional intelligence, and at one point I think we resisted this. I think we had more command and control kinds of cultures. We had more compliance based cultures, and I think now we're realizing that those kinds of environments will only get us so far. And with the significant complexity of our world now, and the rapid change of our world now, and technology and all sorts of other things, we have to operate differently. Leaders don't have all the answers, so they've got to find environments where they can pull in a lot of different perspectives, where that necessarily wasn't the case, 30 years ago, where it was okay for leaders to have more of the answers and to be a little bit more of that, um, command driven.
What about the generations in the workplace? Because now I know that's a big issue. You have
It is.
maybe four generations working in the same environment or at the same meeting who
Yes.
bring completely different perspectives. So yeah, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I have a tendency to look at the generational issues with a little bit of a different lens. I often see the generations as more developmental stages. So while each generation has very significant life events that have shaped them, I think a lot of the behaviors we experience from various generations have more to do with the developmental stage that they're in. So when we're in our 20s, like Gen Z is right now, we all operated in very similar ways to what we're seeing from Gen Z. And again, when we're in our 60s, we're looking for very different things from the workplace. So if you track language that we've used to describe the generations, I'm a Gen X. So Gen X was described very similarly as the millennials, the me generation, and now we're describing those same similar things for the Gen Z. So I think if people look at it from the perspective of I was there once, and when I was in my 20s, this is actually what was important to me, then we can look at Gen Z and their needs a little bit differently than if we box them into a generational, the limitations that we might create with a generational label.
Yeah, I was thinking also the big difference in the digital divide, though, that comes into
Yeah,
play, doesn't it? How does that work in the workplace? Because, you're going to have different baby boomers versus like, yeah, not not so much Gen X, but
more
millennials
millennial.
and down. Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's where psychological safety becomes important too. So how do we get a little vulnerable when we don't have all the answers technology? How do we leverage the people that do, regardless of generation? So the more we can create safety, the more we can actually enhance our collaboration with each other so that we can minimize the generational divide and the digital divide, as you called it. And everyone can kind of come together around things, regardless of our knowledge level in those different aspects. And
And
of
what,
course, AI fits in
yeah,
there.
yeah, well, tell us, how does AI fit in there?
Yeah,
That's a
AI
bit,
is
yeah.
huge. In terms of psychological safety, I think we've got to be a little bit cautious that we're using AI ethically. Um, so the ethics piece is what comes to mind first for me in terms of the ethics of AI and how we link that to the psychological safety piece. If we're not using it well, then we do run the risk of creating environments um, that diminish in trust, safety, and fear.
Yeah, let's get some. I'd really like to be specific about that, though. Like you're talking about the morality and the ethics of using AI. Like, how do you know that you are being ethical or moral or using it correctly? Or how do you train your leaders? Yeah, how does that work?
I think it's relatively new still. So there's a lot of places where I feel like we're still kind of bumping up and trying to figure out those boundaries. I think there's basic things like are we making sure that we're not plagiarizing and that we're sourcing things correctly. We know that AI can give us very inaccurate information, so how are we utilizing it that way? In our work, we're very careful about confidentiality. So when we're having AI assist in looking information up and pulling information together, are we being cautious about blinding things and minimizing bias that might exist? Um, so those are the pieces that come to mind initially in that conversation, kind of
Yeah.
almost foundational.
And I imagine as AI gets more sophisticated, you're going to have more problems, more work for you, but it's
Yeah,
because yeah, AI is going to be able to do a lot more and become much more sophisticated. What
yeah.
about now? What about different kinds of companies? Because do they have different, in terms of psychological safety, like a tech company, versus another kind of retail company, or, I can go on and on, but are there differences in terms of how you approach the issues?
So I would say not in terms of how you approach it. I think more than industry, I think there are certain cultures that are more likely to just exhibit psychological safety just in who they are. Um, so if you think about, and oftentimes it's high performing cultures. So if you look at organizations that have high performing cultures, I oftentimes look at companies like Patagonia. Build-A-Bear at one point had a high performing culture. I haven't looked at them recently, but when you look at those organizations and the elements that have helped to make them, they do have really significant parts of psychological safety, and they've even built structures oftentimes to support that. So they've created. Google, probably what 10 or 15 years ago had play is part of their culture. And I'm thinking about Zappos, 10 years ago, where people could come in and they had autonomy to make certain levels of decisions. So those are the kinds of structures that company cultures that are high performing will put in place to support psychological safety.
So if one is applying for a job, let's take it from the employee's point of view or the potential employee, they're applying for a job. How do they approach it so that you're talking about it's the culture of the company, so that so that they have some idea, first of all, what is the culture of the company and how they're going to fit in before they even accept the job if they have been offered it?
Yeah, that's, I think, paying attention to the questions you get asked in the interviews. So are you being asked really open-ended questions? Are you being asked questions about ways that you've contributed in the past, or how you brought creativity forward? Those are the kinds of interview questions that would lead you to believe that an organization is probably going to value psychological safety more. If you're asked more limiting questions, more questions around well, I can't think of a good one off the top of my head, but questions that are a little bit more around the control pieces, then you're likely in a culture that's going to where you're going to have to be a lot more cautious. It's going to be a little bit more fear based.
Yeah. So you really have to be informed, well informed, I guess, when you're applying for jobs. And because I guess that kind of an interview is going to be kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but it would be similar to the kinds of ways that that company deals with employees, right? I mean, that would just, yeah, be the same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well, and I
Which,
think along those lines too, you're interviewing with the leader that you're going to have, and we know that the leader is critical to employee retention and to building psychological safety. So make sure that the leader that you're interviewing with is someone that's demonstrating these kind of behaviors as well.
let's talk about the leadership, maybe. Okay, the leaders. Who are these leaders? How do they find these, the companies, for instance, we always talk about like middle management is really important, I would say, right? Even sometimes
Oh,
people,
yes.
yeah, I mean, that they're critical. Where do these guys and gals come from?
So ask the question again in terms of what do you mean where they come from?
Like they come from, I mean, they come from different places, obviously, but you get some middle managers who are fantastic, right? Who
Yeah,
really know
yeah.
how to lead, and then you get ones not so good. I mean, they come up through the ranks, or they get them from other companies, so that you get the kind of leader who is going to be very concerned with psychological safety in the workplace, and
Hmm.
leading without fear. I think that's,
Yep.
I'm reading that was the title of your book, but yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my
So in
question.
my mind,
Yeah.
it's a lot about emotional intelligence. So leaders that don't exhibit emotional intelligence are oftentimes going to be the leaders that are going to lead from fear and not psychological safety. So I think those leaders can be made. I mean, we know emotional intelligence can be built and developed. Sometimes we learn that organically through experience with really great leaders. Sometimes we learn it organically from poor experiences with leaders. In groups that I work with, I oftentimes ask them to think about their best leader and think about their worst leader. And more often than not, we actually learned more from our worst leader than sometimes our best leaders. Um, so I think part of it is just organic learning, and other parts are more formal development. So we attend classes and workshops, and we get degrees, and we have coaches that work with us, and those are all ways that we advance our not only our emotional intelligence, but our development, our level of development as people, and the higher we go on that vertical level of development. The more likely we are to to be curious and to create perspectives and to be open and to really kind of encourage others'
Yeah.
voices to come into the room.
Lori, okay, we only have a couple minutes left. So
Oh
you're the
yeah,
yeah, it went by quickly, but you're the CEO of Innovative Connections. Tell us about Innovative Connections.
yeah. So we're an organizational effectiveness firm. So we do work from working with organizational cultures to leadership development, classes and programs. We do executive coaching, like I talked about earlier. Change management is a huge part of our work. The rapid amount of change in organizations right now is significant, and if we don't manage it correctly, then we don't create healthy environments. So all of it links together like this little web.
Yeah.
We're also doing a lot of organizational redesign right now with the economy changing rapidly and regulatory environments. Organizations are needing to restructure, and so the way you restructure also contributes to whether you maintain psychological safety. So we're working a lot with organizations to restructure in really healthy ways.
If one wants to connect with you, give us a website or other platforms that we can connect to so we can and follow you or connect with you.
Yeah, our website is Innovative Connections Inc., which is inc.com. And you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. So Laurie Cure or Innovative Connections. Follow us on LinkedIn.
Great. Thanks so much. Lots of information. And
Thanks, Kathryn. It was
yeah,
wonderful.
it was wonderful. Thank you very much. Laurie Cure, PhD, CEO of Innovative Connections. And we've been talking about psychological safety in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me today is Angela Burke, author of Real Girl's Guide to Midlife. Forget everything you think you know about women in midlife. Angela Burke's raw, unfiltered, and fiercely passionate book shatters the glossy, sugar coated stories that we've been sold about aging gracefully. This isn't a manual for doing midlife perfectly, it's a companion for doing it honestly. She dives into everything from career reinvention to the three waves of menopause, rage, wild symptoms, and all with unapologetic candor. And after divorcing at 45 and raising three young sons, she scrapped the life script she'd been following and rebuilt from the ground up. The result? A long distance love, a blended family of seven, and a trove of hard earned wisdom about sagging knees, vanishing eyebrows, and the unapologetic confidence that only midlife can bring. She's an award winning marketing strategist, mother of three, bonus mom to four, and fierce advocate for women reclaiming their stories at midlife. You can follow Angela on Substack or at realgirlsguide.com. Welcome to the show, Angela. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, Kathryn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, well, this is the biggest topic ever, midlife and aging gracefully. How do you do it? And I'm on the other side of that. So yeah, let's hear, how do you do it? Because all these issues don't seem to go away, the ones I described in the intro. Yeah. So where do we start?
No,
Yeah.
they really don't. And I think the question is how you do it is you do it by being honest, and you do it by sharing how you're feeling and all the things that are happening. And you do it by realizing that you're not alone. I was really struggling with a lot of transitions happening in my life: career, body, identity, my libido, my hormones, the roles that I was playing as a wife and a mother. And at the time, nobody was talking about these things. I felt alone, and I really wanted answers, and I needed expert advice. And the reality is that while I'm 19 years younger than my mom, even my mom didn't talk. My mom didn't share. And certainly, those things could have been out of fear or guilt or embarrassment. And, if I go back to when I originally had this book idea, which was when I was 35, there were, you couldn't even find it on the internet, right? There was just
Right.
nobody talking. And so I really felt like I was alone, and I needed help. I needed to know it wasn't in my head.
And don't you think there's a lot of shame? All those things that you mentioned are don't don't sound like fun. They are, it's kind of there's that my hair's falling out, but where there's hair where there shouldn't be, and where there's supposed to be hair there isn't. There's all that kind of stuff that happens at midlife, menopause. You're supposed to, what about the that whole body? Let's start with the body image thing. 'Cause there
Oh,
are so
yeah.
many. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well,
Like,
and here's the thing, like what I realized for myself is I had some things that were happening internally for me, but really the outward appearance, my body, my face, were the things that I noticed first, right? And I
yeah.
remember a vivid conversation with my mom when she was 40, and she was talking about saggy knees. And I was like, these are English words, but what are you actually saying? Because I was, 20 at the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I hit that age where I looked down and I'm like, I get it. This is happening. And
Yeah.
what was really funny about it was about a year ago, I was sitting with my much younger sister. I have two sisters who are in their 30s now, their late 30s. And I was telling her about this. And again, she looked at me like I was, like I had lost part of my body at the
Yeah.
dinner table. And she goes home and she takes a picture of herself. She sent it. She's like, I see what you mean. So I think that what happens is there's fear, there's shame, there's embarrassment, right? Like I spend right now at this point in my mid 50s, I spend a lot of time talking about my bladder. Okay.
Yep.
That is not a sexy subject. That is not cute. That's not fun, but it is happening. And I was looking around going like, why am I the only one struggling with what pee pad to
Yeah.
use? Like, this is ridiculous. So I think that, there's fear, there's shame, there's guilt, there's embarrassment, and this stuff isn't cute, right? This stuff
Yeah.
is not cute that happens.
Yeah, it's not pretty. And then, of course, it's definitely not pretty, and no one wants to talk about it, including your mother. That's true. And
Right.
but but then you have, and of course, you have all of these midlife celebrities or
Hmm.
people, and you could online and blah blah, and they look great, and that's what you're
Right.
comparing yourself to, and that's even worse. So you have to reconcile all of that. But I think it's what you said in the beginning. You need support. You need a
Yeah.
community. You need a community of women who are going through the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think what you mentioned, like, I think it's great, right? Like, I think it's great that we have so many celebrities talking about this stuff. But for me, I am not them. I am just a mom, a woman, a girl trying to figure this stuff out, that like literally something new and unhinged happens every day. And so I needed, like, and that's what I couldn't connect to, right? I'm not a celebrity. I don't live in Hollywood. I don't have, a bevy of experts, and I don't have somebody coming in to do my glam and to hide my disappearing eyebrows and eyelashes. And that was the piece I was missing. And what I noticed was, once I started talking, and what I share in the book, what I share in the blog sort of opened up a box, a Pandora's box of women who are now sharing with me. And that's what I needed. I needed to feel not alone, and I needed to feel not crazy.
Yeah. Well, you're not crazy and you're not alone. It's just bringing everybody together, as you say,
Correct.
right? You have to
Yes.
make those connections. But what about men? I mean, suddenly you become invisible. Not totally. I don't think it's a little bit later than that. But all of a sudden, all this attention that you get, when you don't have to be gorgeous either, but you walk in a room, men are attracted to you. You go to a bar. Now, no one's attracted to you. Whatever, but that's kind of, to me, that was a big blow. I look like somebody's mother. I don't look sexy, or I don't feel like I look sexy. But anyway,
Right.
yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that you hit it on the head, right? And I think what happens, and it happened for me, and I've heard from so many women in writing the book, and also experts. And when these changes happen, they kind of rock your confidence, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about it, walking into a room with your shoulders back, 10 toes firm on the ground, regardless of what's happening, you attract attention. But a lot of these changes, right, whether they're happening inside of us, outside, if we're grieving the woman that we used to be, we're suffering from losses or illness or job changes, all these things, you lose that confidence, and all of a sudden your back's not straight, your shoulders aren't back. And I think that's the other thing that kind of we don't necessarily talk about, that I could look in the mirror, and there are days where I feel 25. I mean, honestly, and I have a son who's 23, which is a little scary, but there are days where I feel like, I'm 25, like the music that I like, and I'm walking really, with zest and oomph. And then I look in the mirror and I'm like, okay, well, you're not 25. And, but when you are not feeling confident, I think that also hits, right?
Yeah, I think it does hit. I think, though, that the emphasis on looks too
Yeah.
is kind of, if you work on the stuff that you have that gets better, actually,
Oh
is
gosh.
is your brain, is
Oh,
your experience, and all the
yeah.
stuff, and that becomes very appealing and very attractive.
You're right.
Yeah, and very engaging.
It does. And I think the other thing that happens, right, with this transition is, all of a sudden, you, like, for me personally, and a lot of the women that I talk to, you kind of lose the energy to perform. You lose the interest in having to contort yourself to make other people comfortable. And you kind of give fewer F's about things that are happening. And that does become attractive. And that sort of makes you appealing.
Yeah. And you become less of a people pleaser. You don't have to please it. You don't really care, because this is who I am and this is what I do, and you take it or leave it. And
Yep.
yeah, and so that confidence, as you say, whether it really sort of emanates when you come into a room or when you connect with people. I think that we've been taught, unfortunately, to give our power away, to not feel right, to give our power away, that, whether, and I think you mentioned this, or you talk about this in your book. I mean, bosses, partners, societal expectations, and we don't have to do that. I think that whole issue of feeling and being powerful.
I think you're right. And I think for me, and for a lot of the women that I saw, it doesn't happen like in this big power surge, right? It's a little bit insidious.
Yes.
And, for me, I think I told myself a lot of stories, not just what I told myself, but maybe what I was modeled, which was, my happiness needs to come last. That's wrong. That it's wrong for me to want more, right? That I don't deserve more. And I found myself through this process, which I only started in April of this year writing. I've connected with so many women, and I know that I used to ask myself the wrong question, right? I would face into something hard or something uncomfortable or something out of my control. And I would ask, like, why me? That question changed. Now I ask, why the hell not me?
Yeah.
And that, like, again, it kind of, for me, it like makes me stand straighter. I'm firmer in who I am, and I don't apologize for who I am.
I think that you really hit that apologizing thing.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
I'm so sorry. I actually, I think when I went through menopause, I did say I'm never saying I'm sorry again, because yeah, that's a kind of like a self-deprecating thing that I think is very common in women. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and that is
Well,
not, yeah,
and I think what we do is we apologize for our mere existence. Like,
yeah,
how twisted is that? Or, and again, I think for me and for a lot of the women that I talk to, it shows up in little ways. It's like when you say no and you feel like you have to write an essay. Are you kidding me? No is a complete sentence.
right. Yeah,
Like, I don't owe you an essay. I
right.
don't owe you an explanation. I don't have to ask for permission. I don't have to apologize for saying I need help. I need a break. I don't agree. I have opinions. I'm going to voice them. And I just feel like there's this shift that is happening with us. And the reality too, Kathryn, is like midlife is not a moment in time. It's not a decade. It's not like a textbook definition. It's a vibe. It's a feeling. And it's this period where we are going through these transitions. For some of us, it could be a 20-year change. For some of us, it could be 30 years. For some of us, we never stop evolving. And that's the reality. And it's like, you face into this new era of life. And I realized, like, I was done
Yeah,
having to contort and perform. I was done
yeah,
playing small. I was done keeping the peace.
yeah.
And it's liberating.
It
Like,
is
it's
very liberal,
liberating.
and you're not wasting a lot of energy too, because it's
Correct.
enervating to do all of this. Let's talk about sex in midlife. No
Oh,
one wants,
yes.
yeah, okay, postmenopausal sex, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, because
Yes.
I think you address that, and nobody wants to talk about that either, right?
No. Well, and so I'll talk a little bit about my own story, and I'll talk about, what I've been able to learn from so many women who've shared their own experiences. For me, if I'm totally honest, right, I don't think I connected to how I derive pleasure from sex until I was in my late 40s after my divorce. Like, somehow I spent these decades thinking that I like didn't deserve it or it didn't matter. And that was super wrong. So I talk about in the book a lot of funny stories about my first experiences with a vibrator. And they were, I wasn't skilled, I'll just say. And so I sort of came into my own after my divorce. And it started with I needed to understand what pleasure and sex meant for me. And I needed to be comfortable in that. And then I kind of went through my menopause journey was a little bit shifty because I went through these multiple waves. And then about, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, I noticed that my desire had just changed. My libido was different. And I'm like, what the hell is this about? And it wasn't until I read a book, it was a fictional book by Miranda July, that I saw a chart and it explained everything that I was feeling. It was like not a problem with me. It was just, I think my hormones were shifting yet again. And so my desire changed, but it's okay to want. It's okay to admit that, like, maybe you don't understand what pleasure means to you. It's okay to experiment. And it's totally normal when you see these things change and you feel a change. And I think that was the other thing, even for me at this evolved place, when I noticed my libido changing, I kind of turned inward and I was like, what's going on with me? Or I must not be normal. And it's like, I am normal.
Yeah.
And there is something going on with me, and it's okay to talk about. And I swear, like, the minute I started writing about this stuff, all of a sudden the subject of my girls' nights out or dinners changed. And we're talking about orgasms. We're talking about libido. We're talking about vibrators. We're talking about lube. Like, this never happened. And it's wild to me. And it's like, we need to remove the shame and the embarrassment about these subjects, because I've learned a lot from other women now that we're finally saying these words out loud.
Yeah. And you're accepting the change, and
Yes.
you're not fighting the change.
No.
It's all this battle, like, you know, getting facelifts or trying to be I don't want to use the word sexy, but appealing or well, I will use that word. Everything changes, but if you embrace the change, I guess is what, yeah,
Exactly.
you embrace the change, you talk about the change, like you're saying, whether you're, yeah, all those things that were taboo. So now what happens? I mean, you become what?
Well, I mean, you become like, I think you probably become the person that you always were. But for me, I think I'm the person that I just edited for so many decades. And I'm not always sure, like it's still the fear or the uncertainty creeps in, but I can see it happening, right? I can spot it. And that's I think the change, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can, the moments where I feel like my life doesn't feel like myself, where I'm not recognizing myself, I can spot it. And then now I can do something about it. And for me, a lot of it starts with just acknowledging the feeling or something that's happening and going, okay, I'm sitting in that. Then I have to name it, right?
Yeah.
What is this thing? What is it that I'm feeling? I say it out loud. And then I give myself permission to go, it's not in my head. And again, for me, it's been showing up in these different ways. It's changing my behavior and my relationship with the word no. It's saying, if there's something I don't want to do, guess what? I'm not going to do it. And I don't owe you an answer. So it's language like, I'm not available, or I need a break, or I don't agree. And it's like, it's naming the needs in real time. And I think that is what interrupts the old patterns. And it puts me back at the center of my own life. And
And
like,
yeah, and I
yeah,
think also, just to add to what you're saying, is yes, you name it, you label it, this is what it is, but then you also have opened up so that you can talk to a friend, to a
yes,
girlfriend about it, because
yes,
that's the next step, or that's real. You can connect to somebody else.
a
Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think what it does is it takes the sting away.
yeah.
It takes the embarrassment. It takes this story that we tell ourselves that I must be the only one, because we're not. And I think the other thing that it reminds us is that these things show up in different ways for each of us at different times. And so I get smarter by talking to other women, because even things that I don't experience or haven't today or haven't shown up for me, I'm now on alert, because I'm sharing it, because I'm looking out for things that other people have shared with me. And it just starts. And I think that's the other thing that happens, right? Is you can do all these things, and then it's really easy for us to tell ourselves the story about, well, I'm not going to make a change, or doing something feels hard, or I don't have a plan. And really, you just need to begin. It doesn't matter how small it is. It starts with that acknowledging, it starts with saying it out loud, it starts with sharing with a friend, and then just do something different, something small. And that's where it begins.
Yeah,
You
that's where
just
the
do.
change starts. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And the other thing, and just to be even more specific, because I don't know if I read this in the beginning in the intro, but in the book, you really do confront the reality of divorce
Oh
in
yeah.
middle age,
Yeah.
dating in middle age,
Oh.
and here's another one that I've struggled with, and you talk about it as grief of friendships that no
Yeah.
longer fit. That's tough to let go of, to let
Yep.
go of those girlfriend relationships that don't work anymore. So, okay, let's start with the reality: divorce in middle age, and then dating.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. I mean, like it is terrifying, right? Because I think, what I've heard from so many women, and certainly I faced into myself, is I sort of constructed this life that I thought I was going to lead. And here I go in my mid 40s, and that life changed. And it was a good change, and it was a smooth change for me, with the way my ex and I handled it. But it was scary. And all I could envision, right? And I had these nights where I would lay alone thinking, what am I going to do with these three boys? What am I going to, am I going to be alone forever? And what I realized was like, like I needed to grieve the life that I wasn't living. I needed to grieve the story that I constructed that was changing. And it was okay to do that. And it didn't mean that I was a failure. It didn't mean that I was failing at anything. It just meant that my life was going to be different. And like that allowed me to release some of the guilt and shame that came with that change. And then I needed to give myself the ability and the permission to like find what works for me. And like there was no right answer. I'm not being graded. There's not a box that like I have to check. And that turned up in, again, for me and for a lot of the women that I talked to in writing the book and writing for the Substack, is that meant losing what no longer serves you. That could be friendships, relationships, whatever. It could also mean like taking this playbook, right? I have my fiance lives in Australia. I live in California. We do a long distance thing, and we've been doing it for 10 years. There's no playbook for that. Like that doesn't look normal. but I had to lose the idea that there was only one way to do divorce life. There was only one way to do dating. There was only one way to do this new relationship. And the reality is there isn't. There's no playbook. And that can be scary, but also it can be liberating.
Not only is it liberating, but what you also, I mean, you'd be living in this digital age, you have all kinds of opportunities.
Oh my gosh.
Right? I mean,
totally. And it's fun,
yeah.
I mean, and there's a chapter in the book that I write about because, between us, we have 7 kids. So I kind of warn the kids at the beginning of the chapter, like, hey, you might want to close the book, toss the phone. And then at the end, it's like, if you stuck this out, like, I think the answer to you is you're welcome, because it's giving you an ability to, because like, I'm a whole person, right? Somebody had asked me that question, like, don't you get embarrassed? You're writing about sex, you're writing about vibrators, you're writing about orgasms with your boys. It's like, I'm not embarrassed. No. And I am a whole person. Yeah, I'm their mom. Yeah, I'm in my mid 50s, but I am a whole person. And it's not bad that my kids see me that way.
Yeah.
And if they want to have a conversation about it, cool. It's going to open up a topic that they should be talking about. And I want them to be comfortable talking about.
Yeah. Well, they're connected to you in a more honest way.
Real way.
A real way. This is who I am. Exactly. I was
correct.
Yeah. And of course, so what about dating in midlife? Is that different? Would you say significantly different than when you're 30 or even early 40s?
Well,
and what is the difference?
Well, and okay, so I'm going to relate this to a lot of the women who I've talked to through this writing of the book process and in my Substack, because in reality, I didn't have a lot of relationships myself. I had a couple of significant relationships, and then I met my ex-husband. So I wasn't really good at dating. And after my divorce, I didn't really date either. So I think for me, the idea was so foreign in my mid 40s, like, because I never did it. I wasn't practiced at it. And what I see from women who are going through this process now is, again, it doesn't look like it used to. And that reality feels daunting until you stop and go, look, there is no blueprint for this. But what I've seen women go through is, it's scary. It's exhausting. But if you open yourself up to the fact that it doesn't have to follow a rule book, it could also be fun. And so I've seen women kind of embrace that change in mindset. And then, we're dating, maybe you kind of go into this process in midlife and you think, oh gosh, that's the last thing I want to do. If you turn the perspective, it actually becomes fun. It becomes entertaining, and it becomes, something that you can embrace versus repel against. That's the thing I've seen. And I just personally, though, didn't have a lot of experience in my 20s and 30s. So I was super scared at the idea of having to date in my mid 40s. Super scared.
You're talking about changing the script. That keeps coming up. I think it comes up in your book too. Yeah. Change the script. You can change the script. Everything we've been talking about sort of kind of leads to that, right?
It does.
Yeah. There's no proscription that you have to do this in a certain way. You can have a boyfriend in Australia. You can have phone sex on your iPad if you want to. You can, you don't have to be in the same room. And I mean, all of that stuff, which is liberating, I guess, in a real sense, right?
It's freeing. And it takes all of the boundaries away. Like, you can send cute panty pics. Yeah. You can do all these things that, like, in midlife, like, I never imagined in my mid 50s, I'd be sending panty pics to my man. Guess what I do? Is it embarrassing? Yeah. Am I struggling with the camera angle? Mm-hmm. But it's fun.
Yeah. It's fun. It's exhilarating. It's
it is.
And you can get more and more creative too.
Correct.
You can be very creative, right? You don't
exactly.
You don't have to share it with your 3 boys, but
nope.
You can. That's great. I love it. We only have a few minutes left, so I mean, there's so much more in the book, because I did want to mention too that you have therapists, life coaches, people like that. It's like, so they're sort of intertwined with all of the other information.
Absolutely.
And the stories. Yeah.
That's right. So the book is really constructed with, personal stories from myself and so many amazing women who've shared their own experiences, plus experts. We've got sex experts, therapists, transition coaches, we've got attorneys, we've got doctors, we've got nurse practitioners. We cover all of it. And it's, I feel so blessed actually that I was able to get so many folks wanting to contribute to this little harebrained idea I had at 35 that got shoved literally in a red folder for 20 years until I found the folder in December and opened it and thought, why the hell not?
That's what everybody else thought too. Why the hell not? All these
Right.
people, hey, the timing is right. I mean,
That's
I think,
right.
yeah, it's great. And so it really is a real girl's guide to
It
midlife,
is.
right? Yeah.
It really is. It really is. And again, it's not the handbook on how to do it right, but it's the permission slip to do it, to just do it and to do it your way.
Okay, so give us platforms to go to, websites to go to, where we
You got it.
Yeah.
So the Real Girls, Real Girls Guide to Midlife.com is Substack. So you can find me on Substack. I write about 3 times a week. realgirlsguide.com is the website, and the book will be available on December 15th.
Just in time for Christmas and
In
Hanukkah.
time for Christmas.
Right. That's great. That's a perfect present, actually.
It is. Buy it for you. Buy it for your crew. And you can also find me on Instagram, Real Girls Guide 55. I'm not a prolific poster. Like, I literally hadn't posted on social since 2018 until I started this little project. And my reels are fun and cringy. So if anybody wants fun and cringy, you could find me on Instagram.
Perfect. Angela Burke, thanks so much for talking to us today, being on the show. Lots of great information. And the title of the book is Real Girl's Guide to Midlife. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn, for having me. It's been a blast.
Great.